I always knew my life would follow a well-trodden path, even before I was born. My parents taught me early on that my mission was to be the obedient daughter, the good church girl, someone who followed the faith and the norms society expected. I was raised to be everything my community anticipated, the pastor's daughter, an image of virtue and devotion. The church was my home, my father's sermons, my routine. I had always known my future would be a logical continuation of others' steps. Marriage would be next, of course, with someone my father deemed suitable for me, perhaps someone of the same class, with the same education, with the same values. I accepted this because I didn't know it could be different, but everything began to change when he arrived in town. Alexandre, a man I didn't know, and who until that moment was just a whisper among the older townsfolk, an exile, a shadow of a man who had lost everything life could offer. He appeared suddenly, as if his presence were a silent storm hovering over the fields. It wasn't his appearance that caught my attention, but what he carried, an aura of suffering, of someone who had seen the worst of life and was still trying to survive. I saw him for the first time at the town market, a place that seemed so ordinary, but for me, in that moment, transformed into the setting of something unknown. He was alone, as always, with distant eyes, almost as if he were invisible to everyone, except to me. When our gazes met, I felt something I can't explain. It wasn't desire, it wasn't attraction. It was as if he had looked inside me, as if he saw me in a way no one else ever had. Something happened within me. Something small but powerful. A thread of curiosity began to pull my heart toward him, and I knew that from that moment my life would never be the same. In the days that followed, I started finding excuses to cross paths with Alexandre. Sometimes it was just a quick glance, a shy smile, but something in me wanted more. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself it was just a passing curiosity, a momentary distraction. But the more I saw him, the more my mind filled with questions. Who was he, really? How had someone like him ended up here? I knew I shouldn't get closer, knew my life was already mapped out, that my choices had already been made by my family, the church, the town. I was the pastor's daughter, and my life was supposed to be an example, not a question. And yet, something in my chest told me I should find out more. It was on a cold Saturday afternoon that we met for the second time. He was in the square, sitting on a bench, his eyes lost on the horizon, as if trying to recall something long gone. I approached hesitantly, my heart beating faster than I wanted to admit. I didn't know what to say, didn't know what I expected from him, but he, without hesitation, greeted me with a subtle but genuine smile that made me feel he knew I had been watching him. He invited me to sit, and I don't know how, but I accepted. When I started talking, my words came out faster than usual, as if something inside me was trying to break through the rigidity I'd been taught. He listened with quiet attention, and the way he looked at me made me feel that everything I said mattered. We talked about the town, the weather, the few things two people could discuss without committing too much. But with every word we exchanged, every glance that met, something in me was changing. It was as if the world, that safe and controlled world, began to unravel around us. I didn't know what was happening, didn't know what this man was bringing into my life, but I knew something was forming between us, something I didn't know how to control. He told me little about himself, but the little he said made me realize he carried a far more complicated story than anyone could imagine. Alexandre wasn't just a lost man. He had been a king, a man of power and glory, now exiled with nothing but his memories and pain. The shock was immense, but somehow everything he said made sense. I saw him with new eyes. He wasn't a stranger. He was someone who understood what it was to lose everything. The conversation ended with a simple goodbye. No promises, no hopes. But as we parted, The feeling that something had changed in me was undeniable. I didn't know what it was, didn't know how to deal with it. But what I felt for Alexandre was no longer just curiosity. I found myself thinking of him all night. And the more I thought, the more I wondered, why him? Why now, in the days that followed, Alexandre's presence was like a shadow lingering over me. Every step I took seemed guided by thoughts of him. I tried to focus on the things that had always been my routine: the church, serving others, the smile everyone expected to see on my face. But nothing seemed as important anymore. He was in my mind, and the more I tried to pull away, the closer I felt him. Every time I saw him, the impact was the same, a mix of curiosity and something more, something I couldn't identify. I knew I shouldn't. I knew he was a distraction pulling me away from what I'd always considered right, and yet everything inside me begged to know more, to be closer. Finally, on a night when the stars were especially bright, I decided to find him again. I knew my father, seeing me distant and worried, would start questioning my behavior, so the best way to avoid his suspicions was to act. I could no longer live with this inner turmoil without an answer. Not anymore. So I did what I never imagined I would. I sought him out. I didn't know exactly what I would say or how he would react, but I knew I needed to see where this would lead. I, who had always been the image of purity and obedience, now found myself walking toward the unknown without a map, without a compass. Just the desire to understand what this man represented. When I reached the place where he wasn't alone, but in conversation with a friend, someone I didn't know. Alexandre saw me from a distance and greeted me with a subtle smile that made my heart race. He invited me to join them, and though the idea of engaging in a strange conversation unsettled me, I accepted. Time seemed to drag, but at the same time, every second was so real, so tangible. It was as if the world had stopped for me, and at the same time was moving at immense speed. We talked little, but the little we shared left me with more questions than answers. It was at the end of that night that he looked at me differently. His eyes, deep and weary, met mine with an intensity I had never experienced. And in that moment something in me broke. It was as if he knew something I didn't have the courage to face, as if he had already seen my doubts and my anguish, and was now waiting for something from me. The tension was palpable, and when he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. You lose yourself in others' expectations, Clara, and no matter how much you try to deny it, you know you're not happy living under that pressure. His words echoed in my mind. I didn't know what to say, because deep down, he was right. I walked away, unsure of what to do with everything I was feeling. On the way back home, the sense of being torn between two worlds consumed me. I was beginning to understand that my love for him wasn't just a matter of desire or curiosity. It was deeper, more transformative, and most importantly, dangerous. He wasn't just a mysterious man. He was someone who made me question everything I had ever believed. And without meaning to, he was drawing me toward a path that could change my life forever. But one thing I knew, there was no going back. The love beginning to grow inside me could no longer be ignored, no matter how hard I tried. And there, as I looked at the house that had sheltered me my whole life, I knew my choices were about to change forever. The next morning came like any other, but there was something in the air, something different I couldn't explain. My steps were heavier, the sky grayer, as if the world around me knew something had changed. When I woke up, I couldn't convince myself that the previous night hadn't happened. I could no longer deny what I felt for Alexandre. He was in my mind every moment, and the words he had said still echoed in my ears. You lose yourself in others' expectation. Those words repeated in my mind like a mantra. I knew he was right, but at the same time, the idea of going against everything, I had been taught seemed impossible. I was raised to be the image of perfection, the exemplary daughter, the woman who would follow the established plan. I had always followed what my family expected, the values of the church, the instructions passed down to me. Everything in my life was perfectly aligned with what was expected of me. But now, something inside me was beginning to question all of it. I started to wonder in silence if there was another way to live. Was the destiny my family had chosen for me truly mine? Or could I, at last, choose my own path? The fear of disobeying my parents consumed me, but the desire to understand who I really was, free from the chains of others' expectations, grew with every minute. I knew any misstep could mean losing my family, my church, the entire town that saw me as the faithful daughter, but at the same time, I felt I was starting to lose myself within that image. I no longer knew who I was. All I knew was that when I thought of Alexandre, I felt a freedom I had never felt before. He didn't see me as the pastor's daughter. He saw me as a woman with dreams, with fears, with a soul yearning for something more. And that made me not only uncomfortable but alive. As the days passed, I tried to resist. I knew I needed to distance myself from Alexandre, that my loyalty to my faith and family should be my priority. But every time I saw him, every time he looked at me with that deep, silent gaze, I found myself more and more entangled. He was a storm in my tranquil life. He stirred something inside me I didn't even know existed. In the Sundays that followed, as I sat in church beside my parents, trying to focus on my father's sermon, something inside me churned. I heard the words about obeying God, about following the straight path, about living to serve others, and at the same time, I wondered, was I serving God, or was I just playing a role? The weight of doubt consumed me, and with it, the feeling of being trapped in the wrong place. It was as if I were living two lives simultaneously, one that was expected of me, and another that I was beginning to desire, but didn't know how to reach. Time seemed to drag, but inside me, everything was accelerated. I could no longer lie to myself. Alexandre was in my thoughts every moment, and every word of his, every shared glance, had the power to destabilize me in a way I had never imagined. What I felt for him wasn't simple, not just attraction or curiosity. It was something deeper, more transformative, something that made my heart beat faster, but also paralyzed me with fear. I knew that if I gave myself fully, there would be no turning back. I knew this love would be a rupture with everything I knew and everything I had been taught to value. And that possibility, as seductive as it was, terrified me. It was one night, after the service, that I finally mustered the courage to seek him out again. I don't know how, but I knew we needed to talk. I could no longer live in the shadows of my own feelings, could no longer ignore what he meant to me. When I arrived at the house where he was staying, I found him alone, as always, with the melancholic expression he always carried. The atmosphere was quiet, as if the house itself felt the tension in the air. Alexandre wasn't surprised to see me. He already knew the moment would come, and deep down, I knew it too. There was something between us that could no longer be ignored. He looked at me for a long time, saying nothing, and that somehow calmed me. No words were needed. We already knew what we felt, and at the same time, we knew that moment would change everything. We sat together, unhurried. I still didn't know what I wanted to say, but when I started speaking, the words came more fluidly than I expected. I spoke about the pressure I felt, about the expectations weighing on me, about the fear of losing my family and my place in the community. I also spoke about the growing doubt that tormented me, whether I was wrong to want something more, something beyond what had always been imposed on me. Alexandre listened in silence, without interrupting, his eyes fixed on me, as if he were waiting for my decision. waiting for me to finally accept what was right in front of me. When I finished, he didn't respond immediately. He seemed so calm, but I knew that inside, he too was being consumed by something. He was no longer the king who commanded a throne, but he still carried the pain of a fall that had marked him forever. I knew that if I gave myself to him, I would also be saving him from his own loss. It couldn't just be about me. Alexandre needed redemption, and I felt somehow that I was the key to that. But at the same time, I knew he couldn't be my salvation. He was an overwhelming force, but he was still lost in his own darkness. It was he who spoke first, breaking the silence that seemed eternal. I know what you're feeling, but you can't live torn between two lives. I can't be part of a lie, Clara. If you choose me, you'll need to choose it with your whole being. I stayed silent for a moment, his words sinking deep into my soul. I knew he was right. I could no longer live between two realities. The fear of disobeying my family, of betraying everything I knew, was eating away at me. But at the same time, I knew that if I stayed, I would become a shadow of myself. The love I felt for Alexandre was real and could no longer be stifled. It was an impossible choice, but it was a choice I had to make. I didn't know what the future held for us, but in that moment with Alexandre before me, I made the decision that would change my life forever. The decision was made. I chose Alexandre. I chose an uncertain future over a safe life, over the perfection everyone expected of me. And in that moment something inside me broke, but also freed itself. As I walked beside Alexandre, I couldn't help but feel a mix of fear and unexpected freedom. I knew that by doing so, I was leaving behind everything my family and community had built for me. But at the same time, what lay ahead seemed far, more real than anything I had ever known. In the days that followed, the reality of my choice became clear. The town, which had always looked at me with admiration, now watched me with hard eyes. Visits to my parents' house grew increasingly tense. My mother, who had always supported me, began to avoid me, and my father, with his stern demeanor, made me feel the weight of his disapproval with every word we exchanged. He had never been a man of many emotions, but I could see how much my choice hurt him. He told me, in a cold voice, that I was throwing away everything we had built, that I was dishonoring our family, our faith. He didn't say it directly, but I knew what pained him most wasn't that I was choosing another man, but that I was turning away from everything he believed was right. But amid all this, Alexandre remained. He became more than a forbidden passion. He became the man who shared my doubts, my fears, and most importantly, the man who showed me that despite the ruins around us, there was still something to rebuild. I saw in him the reflection of what could be, a lost man who by opening himself to pain was beginning to find himself again. He didn't ask me to abandon my family or my principles, but he asked me to be true to myself, and that's what kept me going, made me believe that the truth we shared was more important than any convention. The dilemma now looming over me was not just emotional but social. I was losing my connection with the people I loved. The fear of being judged, of being rejected by those who had always been by my side, weighed on my heart. With each day, the distance between me and the life I knew grew wider, but at the same time, my closeness to Alexandre grew stronger. He wasn't just there physically, he was in my thoughts, in every gesture, in every unspoken word. When we were together, there were no more doubts, only the desire to build something real despite everything. But when we were apart, the pain of the choices I had made began to resurface. I knew a confrontation with my family was inevitable. It wouldn't be easy. I didn't know what else I would lose along the way. The townspeople began to talk. Some avoided me. Others made comments disguised as concern, but were merely veiled criticisms. It was then that my mother, after weeks of silence, sought me out, her eyes full of sadness and resignation. "Clara," she began, her voice sounding broken, "you were always our hope. We always believed you would follow the right path. How could you choose to live like this? You're destroying everything." Her words were a stab, and the pain of seeing her suffer because of me consumed me. I wanted to go, back, to choose another path, the easier one, the one that didn't involve so many losses. But the truth was clear to me. I could no longer be the obedient daughter, the image of perfection she expected me to be. I needed to be myself, with all my flaws, with all my mistakes. And the only way to be true to myself was by Alexandre's side. What I felt for him wasn't a passing phase. It was real, it was deep, and no matter how difficult it was, I could no longer hide what my heart felt. The town wouldn't easily accept this new Clara, the woman who strayed from everything she had been taught. But deep down, I knew that by choosing Alexandre, I was also choosing a truer life, one where love wasn't conditioned by others' expectations. I didn't know what the future held for us, but with Alexandre, I knew love wasn't a prison. It was the freedom to be who I truly am. What happens after you make a choice you know will change your life forever? I didn't know the answer, but I was about to find out. The decision to stay with Alexandre, to abandon the life I knew, left me in unknown territory, full of insecurities, mistakes, and of course, frustrated expectations. The town pulled away from me. The people who were once so close now looked at me as if I were a stranger. My mother's words still echoed in my mind, haunting me, but the worst was my father's gaze. He, who had always been the figure of authority, the pillar of everything I believed was right, now looked at me with disappointment, with sadness. Every word I exchanged with him felt like an unbearable weight, as if the path I was choosing was an irreparable betrayal. Alexandre saw the pain consuming me, but there was nothing he could do to ease it. He too carried his own shadows, the weight of his fall, the burden of being a man without a throne, without a nation. He didn't talk much about his past, but in the few moments he did, his voice trembled with a mix of anger and sorrow. I knew that behind the facade of a man who seemed serene, there was a whirlwind of emotions, and somehow that bound me to him even more. We weren't perfect. We weren't heroes. We both carried the scars of our own battles, but we found each other in the darkest moments, in the hardest days. When we were together, it was as if the world outside didn't exist. But when we were apart, the external tensions returned to remind us of our reality. Time passed, and I began to realize my choice had deeper implications than I had imagined. It wasn't just about the estrangement from my family, but about building a new identity. I was no longer Clara, the pastor's daughter, the good girl of the town. I was becoming someone else, but who, exactly, I still didn't know. And that doubt began to eat away at me. I started to question whether the freedom I sought was truly freedom or just escape. Was I choosing to live my truth, or was I merely rebelling against everything I knew without knowing what was real behind that choice? That's when everything began to crumble. One afternoon, as Alexandre and I walked through a nearby field, he was approached by a messenger from the town. The tone of his voice was urgent, and I realized with a growing weight that something important was happening. The messenger handed him a sealed envelope, and as he opened it, I saw what I feared most. It was a formal exile letter. Alexandre had been declared persona non grata, not only in the town, but throughout the state. The town was formalizing its rejection of him and anyone who supported him. I knew that by choosing Alexandre, I was also becoming part of this. And in that moment, the reality of what I had chosen hit me hard. I wanted to run. I wanted to flee, far away, where no one knew me, where I could, at least for a while, escape the consequences. But as I looked at Alexandre, I saw what he was going through and knew I could no longer turn back. His pain wasn't just the pain of a deposed king. It was the pain of a man who had lost his identity, his family, his place in the world. He looked at me with the same intensity I had seen the first time, and without saying anything, he led me back to where we were. He was willing to fight for this, for us, but I knew he was scared too. Scared of us getting lost in the chaos that was about to begin. The town didn't take long to react. It didn't take long for them to spread lies, to discredit anyone who stood by Alexandre. My own faith began to be questioned by those who once admired me, and every step I took in the town felt like a reminder that the love I had chosen came at a cost. Alexandre's love didn't free me. It tied me to an uncertain fate, a future without guarantees. But at the same time, what I felt for him was so real, so visceral, that I no longer knew how to live without him. I was torn. Part of me wanted to go back, to ask for forgiveness and try to rebuild what had been destroyed. But in truth, I knew nothing could go back to how it was before. I was no longer the Clara from before. I had already been shaped by another life, by another love. The town, with its rigid morality, no longer accepted me, and in truth, I no longer accepted myself in that place. It didn't matter what they did or said about Alexandre. The only truth was that we were there, together, and that was more real than anything anyone else could say. It was then, as the town rebelled even more against us, that Alexandre made a decision. He could no longer stay there, waiting for an acceptance that would never come. He decided we would leave, that we would start over somewhere where our truth was the only one that mattered. And with that, something inside me calmed. I knew this. Choice would bring more difficulties. I knew we would live with the weight of others' judgment. But as I looked at Alexandre, I knew that even amid the pain and loss, we were building something neither of us had imagined possible. Something real, something ours. And finally, free from the shackles of the past, I understood what it truly meant to be free.